Good evening and welcome everybody to the Suick Seminar Series episode number 4. Where are your muskies and why are they there? This is the structure show. We are going to talk about weeds. We are going to talk about fishing rocks. We're going to talk about wood, and that includes laydowns, log structures, cribs. We'll talk about current as structure. We will talk about bait fish as structure, and we will venture into dirty water and clear water as well. So all of those topics, where, when, and why. And we are with the usual cast of suspects tonight. My good friend and partner, Brent Bocek from Fish NV. He's coming to you tonight from Dunnville, Ontario, the south end of our province. We have Noah Oliveira Hill from Ottawa, Ontario. We have Lisa Goodyear from Bourget, Ontario. We have special guest tonight with us, Kyle Friedges, who is the owner of Beyond the 8, a terrific resource if you haven't checked it out. Kyle makes some pretty special educational videos. He's been a Suick Pro staffer, and he's had the muskie addiction pretty seriously for about a decade. So tonight's show is going to be based off of a number of those fantastic videos. One, the videos are terrific to watch, and two, there's so many points to talk of off those. And tonight, I am coming to you from the island of Cyprus. So 3 different countries coming together for one presentation about muskie love and how to catch more muskies. Kyle, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Pleasure. We've been looking forward to this. The team watched your videos together earlier in the week, and we just couldn't stop talking. I think we filled an hour of commentary ourselves on that, but we'll try to let you have a word or two tonight. And maybe we want to start off and get right into it with first video on wheat beds.
All right. All right, we're going to pause the footage right here. So if you're looking at this footage right now, what you're going to see is on the left-hand side of the screen, there's thicker cabbage, right? While the stalks are spread out, it's much thinner than to the right. And the reason this is important is because this is actually a lane. And if you ever listen to, some of the industry greats from the past, the Steve Herbicks of the world and others, they'll talk about edges, right? And how muskies relate to edges. Well, as you can see in this footage, there's a cabbage line on the left side of the screen, and then there's a blank space where there's no cabbage, creating a lane within this large expansive cabbage bed that these fish will relate to on that specific edge. Pause the video here again, and what we're going to notice is on the right hand side of the screen, now all of a sudden we are seeing cabbage stalks again. So again, now we've gotten to the other side of that lane, and as you can see, as my bucktail was coming into the boat, there was no cabbage to interfere with the bait. That cast was 100% intentional, and the only reason I knew that that lane was there was because I had spent time earlier in the day mapping out this wheat bed, and what I like to do is drop waypoints on the thicker cabbage lines in there, and it became very clear that there was an evident lane within this cabbage bed. So the cast was placed just perfectly down that lane. It ran down the lane. The fish pushed out from one of the weed beds, running that edge, chased me into the boat, and we got her to eat in the 8.
Got him. Got him.
Nicely done.
That is an awesome video with, I don't even know, well, there are so many things to talk about on that. Off that video, Kyle. First of all, Kyle's coming to us from just south of the Twin Cities. He's a northern Wisconsin fisherman, and he's got an affinity for Eagle Lake up in northern Ontario. So some really terrific musky waters that we don't get too much access to in our end of the country. So bringing some diverse knowledge to the table here. What do you want to tell us about that video now, Kyle?
That's kind of a newer style video to our channel. So our channel has been primarily vlog focused. As John mentioned earlier, the channel name's Beyond the 8. You can check us out on YouTube. We're on social media, on Instagram, and you can add me on Facebook if you want as well. I'm always happy to talk muskies, but that's kind of a new style video to our channel that we're calling Beyond the Catch, where will always be primarily vlog focused, but what we're doing in those videos is actually breaking down why we were successful in that instance. And there's a variety of additional topics I plan on getting to at some point here this spring. But what I'm trying to do is release the full video series from our 2024 Eagle Lake trip. I think we'll have probably 3 to 5 more vlog style videos coming from that trip. So quite a bit more content. But what was really special about that video is I really wanted to take kind of the spot breakdown video style to the next level and actually review the game footage and overlay symbols and text boxes and whatnot right over the top of the video so folks could actually see in the footage kind of what I was alluding to. And in that particular case, that was a very large, expansive weed bed. And I cover a lot more of this in that video on my YouTube channel. But as I mentioned, as you're kind of navigating these weed beds, mapping them out, dropping waypoints on them because the weeds change from year to year, it became very evident that there was a lane in there. And that was a lane that I actually intentionally targeted. And I actually raised that fish about 5 casts earlier, casting it the opposite direction. And I changed boat position on her so that I wouldn't be casting into my shadow and reeling into my shadow. And we got her to eat in the 8 on that one. And what I didn't include in that clip, and as we were kind of hashing this out before this, John, was actually just a little bit further as the boat's moving while I'm fighting this fish, there's a big clump of tobacco cabbage, the brownish red, really broadleaf cabbage that complements what in this case was clasping leaf pondweed in this weed bed. When you can find those two kind of core types of weeds in a large weed bed like that, usually where you find the secondary cabbage, in this case it was the tobacco cabbage, that's usually kind of the spot on the spot within the weed bed. So as you saw, it was flat, calm, bluebird. Conditions were tough that day. I spent all afternoon mapping that weed bed and kind of finding those nooks and crannies and those lanes and edges and those clumps of the good stuff to really target later on in the day, and it ended up paying off on that particular fish.
That's really interesting.
I love that that is so next level analysis of a spot. All weed beds are not created equal. You talked about mapping the weed bed. Absolutely critical, something a guy named Hedrick Wachalka, one of the smartest muskie guys I've ever come across, former president of our Ottawa chapter, going back to the 80s and the 90s. And that was the first thing he taught me to do early in the year is go out and map your weed beds, because it's not the same as it was last year. And you're looking for the spot on the spot within the weed bed, ends of that weed bed, depending on what's growing there, on where the wind is coming from, on how thick the cover is, on how shallow it is, are all going to offer different possibilities for muskies, are all going to probably be the spot on the spot at some point. And so what are some of the things, again, that you're looking for within the weed bed? The thickest, you like that channel, you like the meeting of different kinds of weeds. And you mentioned tobacco and cabbage. What you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so I didn't show it in this short clip just in the interest of time here, but if you go out and watch that video, I actually pull up an aerial view of that spot, and it isn't a perfect rendition of the spot, but it's close enough. And what's interesting about that spot is that cabbage bed is adjacent to a very deep basin and a large expansive basin. So what I actually did is I actually fished the edge of it first. So I kept my boat in 20, 25 feet of water, fished the weed edge. And as you're mapping these weed beds, guys, like one of the things you'll learn is that within your particular body of water, you'll see a consistent theme in where the weeds stop growing, right? The sunlight only penetrates so far down into the water column. And in this particular case, and on Eagle Lake in general, on some of the more clear basins, cabbage generally stops growing around 13 feet. And I had my boat positioned in 20-something feet of water, casting up into it, fishing off the edge. I don't believe I raised a fish. And this was actually, I think it was the 3rd day of my trip, and conditions were tough. Flat, calm, bluebird. I spent way too much time on deep rocks because, as you alluded to, John, effectively the weeds change every year. When I get up there the first day and I want to get on fish, I know the rocks are going to be consistent from year to year. Very slim chance the rocks are going to move on you, right? But the weeds change. So I focused mainly on rocks and I wasn't seeing fish. So I fished the edge of that. And then I actually went in and I brought my boat in to where my cast would have been hitting in the weed bed, and I casted it back out of the weed bed. And then that's where I contacted that fish in that lane. And that lane ran very shallow from, 20 feet of water up off the break all the way into the weed bed. And then I repositioned the boat and cast it in even shallower. And she had kind of repositioned herself running that edge. I'm assuming she was feeding on schools of perch and stuff that were pushed in there. But I think the edge near the deep water is critical, particularly for muskies and late summer. And then I think finding those nooks and crannies within there, whether that's a lane, whether that's holes or pockets inside the weed bed, I think is critical too. And the only way you're going to figure that out is time on the water. And unfortunately with weeds, what makes them so challenging is they change from year to year, right? So every single year you got to go figure out, is the edge in the same spot it was the year before? Did we have more snow cover on the ice this year, which inhibited early season weed growth? Did we have a late ice off? Was the weather too cold for growth? Have we not had a lot of sun? Has there been too much rain? There's all these different factors. That water levels, right? Eagle Lake has current in it, right? So the water levels can dictate, depending on rainfall and how they regulate the dam. So there's a lot of different things that play into the weeds. But what I realized on that fish was everybody's out fishing deep. All the guide boats I'm seeing and all the other, folks that are up there on vacation and fishing, they're all fishing deep. And that's what I did for about 2 days. And then I realized that's not where they were. They were buried in the weeds. And that kind of set me off on a pattern for the next 2 weeks on that trip. That was just an absolute blast. But yeah, if there's one piece of advice I could give to people is take the time to go map it out. Actually visually see with your eyes where these pockets are, and then use your mapping and your GPS to drop those waypoints so that when you're repositioning your boat, you're set up for success when you actually go and cast out the weed bed.
On those laneways, Kyle, do you think a fish is using those because he has more than one ambush point? Like he'll maybe bait traveling down one side and then traveling down the other as well?
Yeah, I think that fish was pretty active, right? So I think it was running along that weed bed and looking for perch that are moving in and out of it and maybe don't know exactly where they're positioned. I mean, muskies by nature are ambush predators, right? So they're always putting themselves in a position where they can hide and attack. And Eagle Lake fish love to chase, so they love to cover ground. I mean, I've seen so many fish up there where you'll interact with them on one end of the weed bed fishing the edge, and by the time you get to the other end, that fish has completely repositioned itself because they're just running that edge all the time. So I think this fish was doing that exact practice just further into the bed on that particular lane.
I like how you identified that the weed growth was to a maximum of about 13 feet. And that's an important factor on any body of water, is knowing how far your weeds are going to grow. It's a factor of light penetration, and that's fishing that weed edge is an absolute key. You also identified that spot was next to deep water, which for all of us, complex structure, access to deep water, maybe some current nearby for us on the river, and then in the weeds where there's lots of prey and lots of bait fish. So is that what you're looking for? You like your weed beds next to deep water?
Yeah. I mean, muskies, I think we're all pretty aware at this point that muskies spend a lot of their time in deep water, suspended over the basin, especially on bodies of water that have large schools of ciscos or whitefish, like Eagle Lake does as an example. So those fish will slide up into those weed beds when they're looking for warmer water, they're looking for an easy meal, etc. So I'm always kind of keeping an eye on that deep water basin. I mean, as a general rule of thumb, if you're going to go up to Eagle Lake, I certainly wouldn't go drive to the back of a bay and start casting. I would focus on the points and the weed to rock transitions that are, adjacent to or closest to that deep water first before I slide in deeper. Chances are you'll run into the fish on those spots.
On the Ottawa River, maximum weed growth on the lower Ottawa, probably about 7 feet for light penetration. We have a lot dirtier, more tannin-filled water. It's very dynamic and cloudy. The upper Ottawa, probably down to about 9 feet. And if you go down to Lake of Two Mountains, you've got weeds going to 9, 10, and 11 feet. And those numbers are all critical numbers if you're trolling, for example, or a good place to start. That's effectively the edge of your weed bed. And for me, the problem is either the fish are on the edge, they're in the weeds, or they're out off the weeds. It's funny talking to people regionally because you're an American Midwester, just south of the Twin Cities, fishing northern Ontario, and you're talking about how much your muskies use open water and relate to bait fish out there. And that's something that we don't pay as much of attention to. We fish shallower. We tend to fish structure and current more at our end of the country. So two different approaches. We are more structure oriented. You guys are more open water oriented, and open water is getting a lot of attention these days with new technology, as technology makes it easier to find fish out there. Brent, we want to make a comment about weeds in the Kawarthas.
Yeah, they're dropping off at about 10 feet usually. It's a tea-stained water, about 10 feet they usually drop off. But one interesting thing there is on average, our bigger fish, you'll be sitting in 12, 13 feet casting towards the edge and parallel to them. But our bigger fish, you'll catch more fish there. Our bigger fish on average come casting out into the deeper water. You're not getting as many fish there, but your bigger fish on average will come casting out into that 15 to 20 feet of water.
Fantastic. Another point I just wanted to mention from something that you brought up a moment ago, Kyle, about fish using the channel and the edges of that channel. Hedrick Watelka used to climb on top of a bridge in downtown Ottawa over the Rideau River and watch muskies for hours. And when the muskies were active, he watched them swim to a weed patch quickly and then travel around that edge looking for prey, and then swim quickly to the next patch and travel around the outside. And that's your active fish. And you identified that active fish. You saw it once. It seemed to be eliciting that behavior. And so interesting. A pattern active fish. When muskies are active, a lot easier for everybody. And that weed edge is an absolute key. They're traveling, they're looking. Easy place to pick them off.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would agree with what Brent said too, in regard to the bigger fish, spending most of their time out in that deep water. It's pretty rare where you see a 4-footer or a 50-incher slide up deep into the slop like that. Like that fish I caught in that video was about a 45, and that's about as big as I would expect back in there. Obviously, time of year will dictate some of that, but it seems like the bigger fish, to John's point, will be suspended, and then they'll sneak in there and they'll make a quick round, and they'll either feed or they won't, and then they'll push back out and spend most of their time off the edge. And Glenn McDonald, who you just had on, he talks about it all the time with when you're going to fish structure up on the shield, like start your boat positioning a little bit further off and try and pick those fish off before you actually get in tight to structure, because as soon as you drive right up on them, chances are you spooked them and you pushed them out, and they won't even be on your hit list at that point. So it's kind of one of those things where if you're targeting those bigger fish, fishing the spot out deeper, like I said earlier, where I fish the edge, positioning my boat off of it so I can cover into the weed bed, off the break, and then out into the deep water a ways, puts you in a position of success to try and capitalize on a bigger fish that maybe hasn't pushed into that weed bed quite yet. It seems like, particularly on eagle, the big ones slide in right before dark, and you can't night fish on eagle. So of course they're in there all night feeding while you're sleeping. But then it seems like if you can get out there right at first light, they'll still be in those weed beds sometimes. So it's a little bit of a timing game. You got to play with them.
That's fascinating. Is there a time you have to be off the water at eagle, or is that a lodge policy, a lake policy?
No, it's a policy that was put in place to protect the walleye population years back, and it's still in effect. And it's you can start fishing 30 minutes before sunrise, and you have to stop 30 minutes after sunset. So I actually end up it'll be 2 videos from now. I caught a 50-incher with like 3 minutes left to spare in legal fishing right at the end of the day. So it was a buzzer beater fish, but it was a good one.
Wow, that would be tough for us because as pressure increases in the east, there are more and more of us who are staying out later and later and fishing in the dark. And I make a living at sunset and after dark. And if our fishing's been tough, I mean, we're staying till we get it done or till I've really had it. And a couple hours after dark is often it. So a lake that protects its fish like that, that's kind of unique. Any other places that you can think of that have those rules?
None that I'm aware of.
Really?
No,
and Eagle Lake?
It's interesting because Minnesota guys are doing a similar approach to you, John, where it's a lot of that sunset bite and then through the night kind of a thing, just because the pressures become so intense on some of those bodies of water that oftentimes the only way you're going to get fish to eat is at night.
Yeah. And when cowgirls were... Go ahead, Brent.
Oh, I was going to say, especially on those days where you got the high skies and cold fronts coming in, those that nighttime just seems to, one time during the day where they're actually active. And I think I've actually experienced that with you once, John.
Yeah, I think maybe it's in a television program that we did together. Just might be. So yeah, in those blue skies, we fix blue sky days, at sunset and after dark, and it's exciting. I also love the honesty in that video because you talk about how you've had your butt kicked for 2 days trying to locate active fish, trying to turn fish on in the blue skies, and yeah, we don't catch muskies every day, and we face tough conditions and trying to figure it out as well. And not catching muskies is part of what we do as muskie fishermen. So it's the puzzle, it's the chase, the pursuit of something elusive.
I know we got some other videos to go over there as well. But one thing, we got opening season coming up in just 2 months here, beginning of June. One thing, guys going out opening day, they're not out on the water ahead of time. What you mentioned about how your winter was, how much snow we had, the light conditions, that if you take those things into consideration, you can start to put together a game plan before you hit the water for opening day, thinking about how high those weeds are going to be and what kind of one year had that's going to dictate that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. One of the things I do as I'm driving up to Eagle Lake is I always stop at the Eagle River Dam to see how much water's coming over the top of it. And that kind of gives me an idea for what water levels are going to be doing. And, part of what I think played out for us last year is we had really, since we started going back up after the pandemic, we had some pretty harsh winters and stuff, and weed growth wasn't very good on Eagle for a few years, and a lot of guys were fishing rocks for years and catching fish. And as the pressure goes up, those fish figure out a way to reposition themselves. And this last year was the first year that I can remember since going back up post-pandemic that we had really good weed growth, and I think the fish were really, really relating to that. I heard a lot of guys had tough years on Eagle, and it just wasn't the case for us at all. And we were fishing it very different than all the other boats I had talked to. So something to keep in mind is, kind of thinking through, as Brent alluded to, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is just what kind of snowfall did you have? How late did the ice come off? How warm was the spring? How much rain have you had to wash, nutrients down into the water, those sorts of things. And then just drive out there where you found weeds in the past, or if it's a new body of water, look to, some of the bays and stuff that look like they may hold weeds or be shallower in nature and mucky bottom and sandy bottom, and find those weed beds and figure out for yourself, are the weeds good? Is this where I should be spending my time, or should I be looking elsewhere?
Interesting. We're fishing primarily rivers at this end of the country, and the points you mentioned are maybe even more relevant on the river. Ice flow and ice scraping weed beds off. Your amount of light early in the spring. Sometimes when it's cloudy, high water early in the spring, the light penetration isn't there, and you just do not. You have years where the mid-river structures just are not there. They got scraped. It was dirty. They didn't grow in, and on those years, you can tell if it's bad weed growth early in the. If you don't have good weeds, you don't have good fish. If the weed beds are full, then the fishing is really good off them. And so again, that changes from year to year. And I can tell you the weed structures have changed significantly in the last 30 or 40 years on the river. The makeup of weeds, where they're growing in the weed lines for one thing, but the actual makeup of the weeds. Not all weeds are created equal. Lisa has been giving a number of presentations lately. Lisa, do you have a slide for us to identify some of the good weeds, good types of weeds we're looking for?
Sure do, yeah. Did you want to start with the cabbage that I'm going to start with?
Sure. Cabbage. That's cabbage and tobacco, probably the two most favorite musky words for a guy or a girl who makes who chases muskies. And so what's cabbage and tobacco? Maybe do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, well, as Kyle mentioned, there's different types of cabbage. For us on the Ottawa, we're mostly dealing with the Richardson's pondweed or the broadleaf cabbage, and obviously coontail. I think you wanted to talk about the types of coontail as well, John, and the milfoil as well. I do have a slide for that.
Yeah, the cabbage. Well, just to go back for a second, go back to that cabbage. Can we do that?
Yep.
So cabbage is what Kyle pulled up in the video, and that's what you're looking for as is it fair to say that's your favorite weed structure?
It depends on the body of water, but I mean, if you just look at the two pictures here on the screen, one of them, the vegetation is more spread out, right? And the other is very thick. The thick is great for bait fish, right? Because they can nestle in there and hide. It's not as good for muskies to navigate through, right? Where in the cabbage picture in the upper left, that is, they can wiggle through there and they can hide and they can ambush pretty quickly and generate some speed pretty quickly in that because it's more spread out. So generally speaking, when you hear muskie guys talk about, we got to find cabbage, the fish will be in the cabbage, they're in that sort of weed in the upper left. And that's the main reason why is those fish can ambush, they can hide, and they can move through it pretty quickly.
So the research team was talking to our favorite biologist earlier today, Dr. Sean Landsman, just a wealth of information on everything musky. And that cabbage looks awesome to me. If I see that, I am going to get excited. But he said what really makes his heart get fast is when he sees that red tobacco. Lisa, do you have that conversation with him?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Obviously, they're very closely related, but there's a big difference between the two in how they grow and where they are. So, and obviously it's so, location specific to what you're dealing with as far as your types of weed. But on the Ottawa, for sure, yeah, that, when you see that, you're fishing where the muskies are.
That broadleaf tobacco, which I always thought was a variety of the Richardson's pondweed, until your conversation earlier today. I mean, that's my very favorite of all. And if you have a mixture of several types of weeds together, where the fish can pick and choose, also something really great. And then to go on to coontail for a moment, tobacco, cabbage, and coontail. Those are a muskie's three favorite weeds. So if you have a lake or a river system that's got a wide variety of weeds, those are the three that you should be looking for. I had a guy teach me a long time ago, if you can find a bed of coontail, there are muskies in it. And so really nice picture of a coontail, bed right there. And what's interesting about that to me is what you see at the top of the bed is not what's at the bottom of the bed at all. And so those grow like pine trees grow, where the bottom branches are falling off and you end up with a trunk and then a whole lot of foliage and cover in the upper echelons of the plant. And you have just an alleyway, a shaded, cooler place underneath the weeds. And when your muskies are inactive on the blue skies, for me, a lot of the times they are laying down in that cabbage. They are digesting in that cabbage after they've been on a good feed. your post good hunt time, that's a place that I know that they go to sit and to rest. Anybody else with comments on coontail, or is that something you see up where you fish, Kyle?
I got one on coontail there. Not that I like to admit it, but I did a little bit of bass fishing every now and then. And so talking to a guy about dunking weeds with flipping jigs, right? Finding those little pockets. I was surprised how many muskie I contacted when it, the top was totally covered and you have a hole maybe a foot wide. You drop your flipping jig down in it, jig it a few times. How many times I've actually hooked a muskie in there? How they get into that thicker stuff. As you said, it's like pine trees, though, right? They have a little bit more room down below, but you'd be surprised how there's no way you could fish that with a Suick, right? Or blades or anything like that. But dropping a jig down in there, you got a chance at some of those fish that are sitting right down in there.
That's a really good comment, Brent. You know who catches a lot of muskies around Ottawa is the bass tournament guys, and it drives them nuts because they got 8 hours to get a bass, and they're all rigged up, and they got their favorite bait on, and then they got 20-pound muskie on the end of their line to deal with. 5 minutes, maybe they got cut off, and and it's funny. And so you working the heavy coontail and coming across muskies, the bass tournament guys. I don't know how many times Big Jim tells me, about the great week he just had muskie fishing while he was out chasing bass. And so, yeah, that's a good place to be. And your fish are active hunting on edge. They use weed beds for so many different things, for hunting off of, but for digesting and for just laying in. And the bass guys do contact them a lot for sure. Does coontail mean a lot to you where you fish, Kyle?
In western Wisconsin and northern Wisconsin, I would say yes. There's a lot of junk weeds in a lot of those bodies of water that have kind of developed over the years as the weed beds have changed. And if you could find coontail, generally that's what the muskies will relate to in those particular bodies of water. There are some bodies of water that still have cabbage, and I would say that's probably still preferred based on my own anecdotal evidence. But if you don't have good cabbage in your system, try and find some coontail, and that'll oftentimes lead to success.
Okay, what are junk weeds? What's junk weeds at your end of the country?
Milfoil and there's a whole bunch of it. We get a lot of the like real stringy. I don't even know what the name of it is. Like real stringy stuff.
Tape grass.
Yeah, it's river grass or something. I'm not even sure, to be honest with you, but it's just hard to fish through. Your blades get all tangled up in it, and your top water does, and you almost have to rip rubber through that stuff.
Yeah, say again, Brett.
Is that almost like rice? That stringy grass.
I think it's a weed that's taken over a lot in the St. Lawrence and a lot in the Ottawa River as well, and it's displacing traditional weeds. Everything is changing in our system. So tape grass, eelgrass are common names for it. Are common names around for it here. Pain in the butt grass, that one comes to mind, and that's the stuff that after a big weekend of boating later in the summer, that's the swag that's just all over the surface, that's making your trolling efforts no fun. And so, yeah, as things change, that is not a good weed. You mentioned milfoil. You have a slide of two types of milfoil. So Eurasian milfoil is an invasive. It's a problem. It takes over a lot of lakes. Chautauqua Lake, for example, it's a huge issue. Chautauqua's got all kinds of different user group: jet skiers, muskie fishermen, the cottagers, the swimmers, and so the people don't like that. And so there has been a controversy for poisoning, for killing, just all kinds of ways to eradicate this weed in different places these days, that are not necessarily good for your lake, good for your body of water, good for your populations of fish. And it's using a new technology to solve a problem. That Eurasian milfoil is a thick invasive. It's a problem everywhere. That northern milfoil on the right of your screen actually grows in tufts with spaces around it. So it's a clumped weed bed, and that acts to attract muskies in our system. So 2 different types of milfoil. The Eurasian milfoil I'd stay away from. Northern milfoil. In the reservoirs in the States, I used to fish Cave Run. Had the pleasure of fishing it a few times. They say people introduced Eurasian milfoil because there were no weeds in there. And when you have no weeds, any weeds are good weeds. And on that note, let's bring in Noah Oliveira, maybe, who has a comment about weeds at the end of the season, I think. What do you want to say about that, Noah?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about tobacco cabbage and just regular cabbage. They're a weed that I find stays lively a lot longer than your coontail and your milfoil. So those are weeds that I'm specifically looking for in the later season. As the water cools, fish will start relating to specific patches that do stay lively. And I've had a lot of good success with catching fish in those lively patches late in the season.
Standing weeds, any weeds, I mean, your weed beds are all laying down. They die at different temperatures, most of them, but there are weeds that stay standing through the end of the season. There are weeds that stay green through the end of the season as well. So if they're standing, they're good. If they're green, they're better. And if they're the last weed standing, then that's the only cover. Imagine if you're a bait fish looking for a place to hide, that's all you've got. And so, you know, that's good. And I spend a lot of time learning to catch fish in 2, 3, and 4 feet of water in November, when a lot of the traditional thinking, and I spent years doing it too, was trolling big baits in deep water or open water, but catching fish in the 2 and 3, that's a nice one. That's a nice one to pull out at the end of the season.
I can talk a little bit on that fish. So that fish was caught in a weed patch. It was sitting in a weed patch in about 4 feet of water. And this is mid-November. So we were having water temps in the high 30s, low 40s. Spent that whole afternoon trolling rock breaks and whatnot. Just weren't seeing any fish. I was seeing bait, but I wasn't seeing any fish. Decided to go try the weeds. I went and I found good, healthy weeds, which was, of course, this was a tobacco cabbage fish. It only took about 2 minutes and that fish ate. Again, adjacent to deep water, healthy weeds. Yeah. And good bait around there as well in the deeper water.
Fantastic. It sounds like the 5 of us could sit and talk weeds for the whole hour. So maybe I will just conclude the weed portion of this program by referring to Project Noble Beast on the Dr. Sean Landsman's famed study on the Ottawa River. That is a Bible for me in muskie fishing and muskie behavior. If you haven't read it, go and find it. No matter what the conditions, no matter what the time of year, there were always fish in the good weed structures. If you're confused, if you're having a tough time, if the blue skies are kicking your butt, go find a good weed bed. Guaranteed there's fish in there. It's just up to you to get them to bite. And on that note, let's talk a little bit about rock. I like rock. I go to a lot of rock concerts, and I catch some muskies on rocks too. Being from the north, Kyle, rocks seem to mean way more to you guys because you have way more rock structure up there. Why don't we start off with one of Kyle's rock videos and then let him go for a minute or two?
Kyle, do you want me to play your figure 8 rockfish or your other one?
Let's do the other one.
Okay.
So this was a brand new Suick out of the box that I added a little weight to. It was touching up the hooks. I like to piece in the spot names for all of our different spots.
pulling. Maybe not, just gotta pull him in the cockeye here. Find him out. Well, we're on a little bit of a Suick bite, and this one's gonna be just fine. Huh. Unreal.
Awesome video. Lots of learning points off of that. What do you got, Kyle?
Yeah, so what we didn't see there is actually on the prior spot I caught a fish about the same size, and it almost passed on me. I stuck around with it for like an hour to get it to revive, and anybody who's been there in the muskie world and has had a fish really struggle on them understands kind of the feelings and the emotions you go through in that moment. And we all want them to release. We all want them to release good. I mean, we're out there for entertainment, and all of a sudden their life's at stake, right? So I was a little bit down, so I was killing some time. I figured I might as well modify a new Suick, and 5 casts later on the very next spot, we stick that fish. And what made that spot so good was, as you guys saw in the video, is the wind was kind of sweeping into that point. And there's actually an extension that doesn't come off the tip of the point. It comes off the side I was casting. There's an underwater rock extension there. And as it kind of pushes the wind over that, it creates a current and an eddy on the backside of that. And that fish was actually holding on the backside of that, kind of nestled down in the rocks. The important thing about rock structure is it's not all created equal. They need a place to hide, right? And they need a place to either set up on the windblown side where they can get somewhat out of the current, or roam as bait fish are being pushed into rocks, or they need to be on the backside in the eddy. And while you couldn't see it visually with your eyes, I've driven over the spot, I've auto charted it, I could see it on my side imaging where that fish was holding on that particular spot. So that every rock structure is obviously a little different, so you kind of got to learn where they hide and why they hide on each particular spot. But what made this one so good was just the direction of the wind. Wind direction is important when it comes to rocks, and it played out perfectly on this spot. So
next, the level analysis of a spot. Wind blowing on rocks, and you picked out the current element that comes off the wind blowing on it, which, I mean, we live in a river, so we look at current as a much bigger part of our lives. Current on a lake is primarily wind driven and equally important. So when you have wind blowing up, Brent, you love, as soon as the wind starts to blow, you go to rock structure. I know you wind, rock, Brent, you can find them.
And if you got a little overcast, it makes it even that much better.
which was in that video. Absolutely. So that's your go-to to go to rocks as soon as the wind's blowing. Something else I really liked about that video, Kyle, was you fought that fish with a lot of patience. There are a lot of people I see just horsing that fish and pulling that fish into the net. And I don't know, it came off in the net. If you'd horsed it, you probably would have lost it. Could you see that it was just the back hook of that Suick in the fish's mouth?
it was actually hooked better, and then when it jumped out of the water, it ended up just being hooked in the beak. But that's the patience you mentioned there. That depends on the day, John. I'm not gonna lie. There's some days where I'm like, we just got to get the dang thing in the net, and there's other days where I want to play them out a little bit more. And when I'm solo, I generally try and play them out a little bit longer, just to make sure that you're gonna tire them out and they're not gonna do something squirrely as you're moving your hand up the rod. And when you're fishing with 9-10 foot rods, it's a long reach to get the net underneath there, so you almost always have to choke up on the rod, which puts you in a really vulnerable position. So the more exhausted they are, the easier it is, and usually the more certain it is that you're going to get them in the net.
Well, you made that look easy, so fantastic. Maybe one other comment. I'm going to get this word wrong, but Dick, have anybody in the group read Muskies on the Shield, Dick Pearson book?
Yep.
Yeah, for fishing Northern Ontario, Eagle Lake, Trout Lakes, it just next level analysis of behavior from years ago. Dick Pearson was such a smart guy, but he talked about when wind blows on a shore like that. I mean, obviously you see the surface, the water is moving, you can see it. And so physics tells us for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And I think I'm going to call this a type of sushi, but the word I remember is sashimi. And so that was the, when wind blows onto a structure, you have an equal current at the bottom coming off of the structure. So although you've got bait fish going in, you've got a current actually coming the other way, and the fish are relating to that. It is disorienting bait fish. It's a place where your fish are feeding as well. So, you know, you don't have to just fish the surface of those winded areas. There is a lot going on the bottom. That's next level analysis too. What are you looking for? What's a good, you talked about not all rock structures are created equal, Kyle. What's good rock structure for you? What's lesser structure?
Well, real quick, maybe we should conclude on why Brent moves out of weeds and onto rocks, and I do the same thing. And that's generally because, as we saw in those weed pictures, and even in my video, you know, those cabbage stalks are really tall and they're skinny. And what ends up happening is when the wind picks up, they blow over like this. And as that current's going, as you mentioned, there's current pushing with the wind, and there's also current coming back, and they're sitting there doing this, right, underneath the water, versus sitting upright and providing predictable cover. Now all of a sudden they're unpredictable, right? So those muskies push out of the weeds onto the rocks, and generally they'll push onto wind-blown rocks because the bait fish are pushing in there. So that's the number one reason why when it's bluebird and stuff, I'll gravitate towards cabbage, vegetation, weed beds, sand even. And then when it's windy, I'm almost always pushing onto rocks. And usually what I'm looking for in a good piece of rock structure is a very complex boulder structure under the water, meaning boulders that range in size from, because I'm an American, I'm not going to use inches or foot. I'm going to use objects to describe it, like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle car or like a basketball, like ranging in size from that, right? That oftentimes are related to or adjacent to deep water. So you have this piece of structure these fish can slide up into and burrow down in between those rocks and have a hiding spot or cruise the edge of it. And what they're doing is, because the wind's blowing in there, it's pushing small bait fish in there, minnows, schools of minnows, which then pushes the whole food chain in there, right? The walleyes, the ciscos, the perch, they're all going to follow those bait fish. Everything wants to be close to the refrigerator. So as that wind's pushing everything into that shoreline, those little bait fish become stunted. The walleyes and the perch and the other bait fish are busy feeding on them, and they're vulnerable. And that's why the muskies are in there to feed on the whole food chain. So usually they're ambush predators. You're looking for a lot of good complex structure. You can see it very clearly on side imaging. The type of rocks you're generally looking for where they have a spot to sit and hide and ambush in that wind current, and as those bait fish are kind of roaming over the top.
Volkswagen Beetle, I absolutely love that. That's a term that I heard fishing in Northern Ontario when I was a teenager, and just big round Volkswagen sized rocks, and every one of those has a big shady patch on one side. Fish don't have eyelids, so you know that's a preferred place to sit. That's a place just to be out of the sun, place to relax, and that's a place you want to target. So very cool. Noah, you had some comments on rock in the Ottawa River where we fish. It's 1,300 kilometers long, 900 miles long. A lot of rock in the upper portion. The lower Ottawa, where we fish, rock is a tough component to find. So we have a silt bottom, a log-covered bottom. Rock is a tough commodity. the Upper Ottawa, where you're a little more familiar with, much more rocky, much more northern Ontario. What does that?
Yeah.
What does rock mean to you? No?
So I'm gonna be honest with you, John. I'm still in the whole learning process with rock. I fish it a lot in the fall. That's the way I learned, trolling rock breaks and whatnot. But as I keep growing my, as I'm learning and stuff, I'm really starting to realize the different types of rocks. Exactly like Kyle was talking about boulders. In the Ottawa, we have a lot of jagged rocks and a lot of, I like to call it cliffs. Where it's an immediate drop from 4 feet or right up on the bank, straight down to 30 or 40 feet. And I find fish will really use those in the fall, especially your bigger fish, and especially relating to current. So I'm looking for those breaks adjacent to the main channel where there's a lot of water moving through. And I'm looking for any back eddies there. And those are places I might target or do multiple passes right by while I'm trolling or whatnot. Just because that's where a fish is going to be hiding. They're going to be hiding on that wall. And if there's a dent or something in that break, that's where that fish is going to be hiding, waiting for something to drift by.
Those vertical rock structures in the fall, that's a key phrase for muskie fishermen. If you set somebody from Montreal loose in the Ottawa River, they will go and seek that out. At least that's my experience from the old days there, especially in the fall, looking for the real steep cliff type drop-offs. Interestingly, your smallmouth bass fishermen are starting to target bass off of those walls, 25, 30, 35 feet. Brent Bocek, 20, 25, 30 feet off of the vertical structures. And so, yeah, later in the year, vertical rock structures, absolute gold, and because of the depth that you want to get to, much easier trolled than casted. If you're trolling, your bait is down there in the zone all the time. If you're casting, logic dictates your bait is down there probably 30, at most maybe 40% of the time. So just a more efficient way to fish. I'm a caster, but a good rule is don't tell the muskies how you want to catch them. Let the muskies tell you.
One thing on those rock faces too, John, I've noticed in, like, say where you maybe have 10 feet of water, French River area, Pickerel River in Northern Ontario here, we have, I've seen in the morning in the fall, like late October, you got those really cold nights. First thing in the morning, that sun's beating on those rocks, and I found fish right up tight against those rocks in the morning. You don't find them on the shady side, but you'll find them on that sunny side. And it could just be just because it's just a little bit warmer in there, and those fish are using that.
Good points, everybody. Any concluding comments on rocks? I'm confused because it's 3:30 in the morning here in Cyprus, and so I'm often confused. But we've been going for 55 minutes.
We have.
Yeah.
God, you guys talk a lot. Muskie people talk a lot, man. That's all we got this time of year, right? Let's move on to wood structures.
Before we do, sorry, John. Just before we do that, when Kyle was talking about the rocks and the way you guys talking about the currents coming in and out, when we're fishing those spots, we can't actually physically see the bait getting pushed around. But we've all been on a beach, whether it's in the ocean or freshwater beach or at a boat ramp, and you see minnows, and you'll see the waves coming in, and you'll see the fish, the minnows getting pushed in and then pushed back out with the current and stuff, right? So that's what's happening in there. If you want to physically see what's happening, and that's what makes them an easy target for the panfish coming in to feed on those, and then of course the muskie are coming in to feed on those other fish.
Yeah. Another comment from Dick Pearson's Muskies on the Shield, the turmoil and chaos theory. When you have the really big wind pounding in on the shore, any of your smaller fish are disoriented and thrown around, who's comfortable in that is your big, bad muskie. It's an easy place for him to pick up meals. The current doesn't affect that fish like it affects your smaller fish. So, and with that, we should move on to wood. I should mention to anybody who's listening, and I forgot to at the start of the show, if you send in questions to us. We will answer them. If not here tonight, we will answer them in the next couple of days. So appreciate you listening. We want to tell you what you want to know, or tell you how we would deal with the situations you described. So send in your questions. We'll get to them. Let's move on to wood structure. Do we have a video? No, not really, eh?
We do not have a video.
All right. Lisa.
I don't run into a ton of wood, John, admittedly. A little bit on some rivers I fish, but yeah, nothing handy for videos.
Well, I will reference laydowns and how important they are in reservoir fishing in the States. A lot of our people in Ohio and Pennsylvania are fishing reservoirs out here. And I went to school with some great people a long time ago in Cave Run, and they taught me about fishing the laydowns. First, you got to go to the hollow, and then you're fishing the laydowns. And when the water was high, you were fishing right in on the shore next to the laydowns. And as the water was dropping, that was interesting. Interesting that you looked at water height before you went to your body of water. The people I went to fish cave that were teaching me to fish cave run were calling 2-3 times a day to find out where the water levels on the dam were. Rising water meant that the fish were going to be in shallow. When the water's too high and overflowing, you fish the picnic tables and the parking lots. Your muskies will go and explore. They will get as shallow as possible. It's just in their nature. And so high water, fishing next to the shore, fishing next to the laydowns, lower water dropping, fishing out off the ends of those, and in the fishing much more in the middle of the hollows. And something else that was interesting in reservoirs was at Cave Run, I think is the only place I've ever done this, standing timber in 40, 50, and 60 feet of water. Before they built the reservoir, they didn't cut down a lot of the trees. And so they were left standing. They've been there for 50 and 60 years. And it is really freaky to go into the standing timber and see big schools of shad hiding in and around those. It's a different game for presenting and casting. I think probably jigging bondies and other soft plastics is a good way to go in those these days. Lisa probably catches more muskies off of wood than any of us here. So how do you do that, Lisa?
I've actually got a video I can pull up here. So obviously the Ottawa River is known for the logging trade. It was a major part of our history. 1,200 kilometers of river, moved a lot of wood in the early days. And there's a lot of wood that just kind of fell to the bottom, but there's also a lot of wood that was intentionally put there in crib structures so that they could tie the log booms and whatnot. And as part of the trade, I've got video here. Let me see if I can pull it up. This is just fallen timber on the bottom. Let's see what we do here. And I've got a client jigging. And what you're going to see is, obviously with the live scope, we're able to keep the bait right above the timber. Whereas if you didn't have that, obviously you'd be snagged a lot. You can see how much timber is on the bottom. But what you're going to see is how the muskies use that wood as structure and as a ambush point. So you're going to see the muskie actually shoot up out of the timber right there and hit the bait. The other really eye-opening thing for me about fishing the structure is you don't always have to be right on top of it. They're not always going to be right in it. In fact, a lot of the time I'll fish on the very edge of the structure as they'll sit off to the edge of it. And in this particular case, this patch here also has a current seam on the edge. So there's a whole bunch going on. There's always bait fish here, and it's just a muskie magnet for sure.
Awesome video. Muskie and sturgeon.
Mm-hmm.
Find a lot of sturgeon on the structure too.
Yeah, actually, I found that if the sturgeon are there, the muskie are there. So that kind of correlation has been kind of neat to see for myself.
Interesting. And how do you tell the difference between a sturgeon and a muskie?
The profile, obviously, the easiest way, if they turn on you on the live scope, the easiest way is the tail. It's a pretty dead giveaway for a sturgeon, but obviously even just the head profile You know, once you've watched it enough, it's pretty easy to distinguish between them for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I consider that my job almost, you know, in the boat is to keep facing that computer screen and there's only, you know, there's only two fish that are over 4 feet long in the river. And you see a lot of those fish and it's either a sturgeon or a muskie. So identifying what it is, whether it's worth a cast at, although my friend Brent Bochek and I have an awesome video of a spectacular fight casting at a fish that we identified as a muskie.
I think it identified as a muskie itself, but it didn't look like one.
Well done. Well done. Yeah, Brent and I were fishing in dirty water. The fish got hooked in the mouth.
Just actually on the top of the head.
Top of the head. Okay, so you know it was hooked where a predator fish, where a muskie is going to grab the bait, and the water was dirty enough that we just thought we had the most active muskie around the boat. This fish just wouldn't stop running around the boat, and it finally in the net. And yeah.
I honestly thought it was probably going to be close to a 50-inch muskie the way it just kept bulldogging on us.
It was a lot of fun, but yeah, it doesn't count.
It's no good when you're shooting a muskie show.
Noah, you had a comment on cribs, right?
Yeah. So
what's a crib? What's a crib?
Lisa kind of explained it. They used it in the logging days, and they used them to tie up the booms. And you taught me this as well. And it was always usually outside of the current, so it wouldn't get drifted. The booms wouldn't get drifted down current and whatnot. So they're usually stuck up in bays and whatnot. Lisa, do you have a photo to pull up there with a crib fish?
Are they filled with rocks, Noah?
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. The ones that are, you can easily lose a prop on. And trust me, I've dinged a few in my time. But anyways, I wanted to talk about this fish here. So this fish here was caught in a weed bed. And we caught it. It came straight out of the water. It was an awesome fish. It was 46-inch fish. Got in the net. But then we turned around and we came back. And I was looking on side imaging. And all you see is weeds. And then you can distinguish a big crib, a bunch of logs and whatnot. And that's exactly where that fish came off of. Although a lot of the cribs in the Ottawa are marked. So they have a buoy on them, or they're marked on avionics. You can see them ahead of time. This crib that this fish came off of wasn't marked. So again, it was in about 6 feet of water. But also talking back on what Kyle was saying, distinguishing structures and different types of weeds and whatnot, finding a rock pile or a crib or a log pile in a weed bed it's different structure. So that is a difference, and that's where a fish is going to relate to. So that's like the spot on the spot. And this fish came off that spot on the spot.
Fantastic. Those cribs are magical. Most of them are marked. A lot of them aren't. And on that note, Lisa, you had some comments. I think you have an awesome video about old technology is using a map, making your own maps and exploring. As Kyle was talking about the importance of that early in the show, is going to teach you that your map is not nearly as accurate or as detailed as you thought. So what are the learning points off of this for us, Lisa?
Yeah, so especially like you talked about earlier, John, with the river being so dynamic, it's constantly changing. And finding that spot on the spot sometimes is the key detail. And this one for me was a real eye-opener earlier in my career. So you can see I've got some waypoints here where I've caught some fish. And you can see most of them are kind of on the weed line, but a few of them appear to be kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And so as I progressed and I got my auto chart card, which was a game changer, I remapped the whole area. And it was really interesting how my waypoints correlated to the structure that was actually there, not what was on my Navionics card. So in the next picture here, you're going to see where my 3 waypoints were. There actually was a much bigger raised hump than showed on a Navionics card, and my waypoints correlate directly to that hump. So it just goes to show you how important that is when you're targeting muskies. And the other thing with this auto chart is You can see I have it set to different colors. So I like to do that specifically for trolling because it allows me to follow a contour very precisely. Whereas with the previous image you see, it looks like you could just troll down straight, no depth changes, no nothing. Whereas with the auto chart, you can directly see where the edge is and you can really precisely troll.
Really great slides, Lisa, and something that all of us have mentioned. So if you're listening to this, it's achieving a truly detailed, a micro level understanding of your structure, the nooks and crannies. The more you understand that structure, the more you understand how it works, the more fish you're going to catch. Plain and simple. Any other comments on wood, team?
Yeah, I got one. It's amazing how a muskie will lay right beside that piece of wood. Many years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I was throwing a small, shallow running crankbait in real shallow water, probably about 2-3 feet of water, fishing for bass, and brought it across the end of a log. And all of a sudden, I see this little flash. I thought it was maybe a rock bass or a sunfish until I kind of set the hook when I felt the tap. And it was a muskie, probably about a 34, 35-inch muskie that was laying right beside that log. It was just a flash off his cheek when he opened his mouth to grab that bait. I always preach every time you catch a fish, you should learn from it. And that fish taught me, many years ago that muskies will actually lay in shallow water right parallel to a log. As Kyle was saying earlier, ambush point, right? My bait could have been a perch or something coming across the front of that log, and that fish was right on it.
Man, I still have this video in my head from 35 years ago of seeing two logs side by side in the shallows, throwing a cast over to it, and one of the logs got up and swam away. And to this day, that's one of the biggest fish I have ever seen. I just drop my jaw and watch it. I no, it wasn't gonna hit my bait, and it was annoyed that I was there. It was no chance to catch it, but just it's just so that was a fish of possibilities laying right beside the log. Good point, Brent. Good point.
So as usual, we've gone over time a little bit here, John, but we should get to at least one question, I think, don't you?
I don't think we've done an episode without a question. What do you got?
Okay, so we got a great question here from Henry. He's asking, what determines or what factors affect whether fish are holding tight or roaming around structure? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
If they'll be roaming around a lot more if they're active and looking to feed.
Exactly. I was going to comment on it as well. Talking between, I like classifying muskies in three ways. They're active, they're neutral, or they're not active. A not active fish is going to be tight to the bottom and tight to the structure. If you throw a bait right at their mouth, maybe they'll eat it. Maybe they won't. Your neutral fish, yeah, if it's right on them, they're probably going to take a swing at it or they'll follow you in. And then an active fish, that fish is going to be moving around looking for food. So those are fish that you're most likely going to catch. And those are fish you're also going to catch, and they will bite outside of the boat.
Kyle, that's good points, Noah. Very good points. Kyle, you got any comments on that?
That was well said. I think it depends on time of year too. I mean, I'm not sure if his question was more centered around whether fish are active or not, or why they would place in certain areas, whether that's on a weed edge or actually in the bed. I think it all depends on what the bait fish are doing. So I'll maybe approach this slightly differently than Noah did, where he was looking at it in terms of active versus negative versus neutral. What I'll say is, if you find a really large, expansive weed bed, the fish will be in there with the bait fish, assuming the bait fish are in there. Generally speaking, in my first video that we showed here early in the show, I would say that given the size of that weed bed and the fact that there wasn't a super abrupt, prominent edge, it kind of pushed me into it more, I guess, earlier on in the spot than I maybe would have if there was a more traditional classic steep break right off of it, where I would have maybe spent a little bit more time on that edge. So I think they'll relate to bait fish on structure. And then for rocks and wood, even those fish will hold near and around the schools of bait fish that are holding there. So if it's calm and the bait fish are deep, suspended, 20 feet down off of a deeper rock point or a structure like that, the muskies will probably be there. If it's windy and the bait fish are pushing up onto the shallow parts of that rock structure, that's where the muskies will be. So especially if they're active and feeding, as Noah alluded to, those are the ones we want. Those are the ones that are going to bite. Those are the ones that are fun, and those are the ones that make your day.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well said, everybody. Well said. Maybe I told a lie at the start of the program when we were going to talk structure about a little more than rockwood and weeds, but those are the three basic structures that any muskie angler needs to know, need to understand when fish are there, why they're there, and how you want to attack that structure. So good comments. When they're active, maybe you comment on that. Muskies are creatures of the edge. I love finding the fish on the edge. If they're on the edge, they're generally in ambush mode. They're generally active, and your muskie fishing is easy. So my advice on that would be fish fast. If you're catching fish on the edge, cover a lot of water, cover a lot of edges. Your fish are on. If your fish are in the weeds or they're hunkered down or you're not seeing them, then you're going in, and then your game is more micro fishing, slower, more methodical. It's going to be a lot more work to get them out, and it's just the challenge of the day. We all want that active fish day, but the blue sky days, they just don't make them active, and you got to work a little harder. So good job, everybody. Good job. Hopefully there's some positive feedback from the audience out there. A few people learned a few things. I learned a few things tonight from you, Kyle. Thanks a lot for being here, man. A pleasure. We could easily go on for many more hours and do a couple more shows together, I'm sure. Well, maybe we'll have to explore that. So from the Suick team to all of you, thank you very much for being here. Hope to see you at Suick Seminar Series episode number 5, first Monday in May, which is a little ways away from the season opener for us up here in Canada. I know the seasons have already, a lot of them have started opening or been open all through the winter. It's muskie season. We're going to talk about early season muskies, what you need to know and what you need to look for to be successful. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you next time.